Tim Holmes is chairman, mentor, governance educator. He currently serves as one of the senior partners at the Sirdar Group, where they educate, appoint, and guide high-performance boards for privately held and family-owned businesses as a way to help these businesses to grow and scale. His ultimate objective is to make a meaningful economic impact by building strong, sustainable businesses and creating more jobs in South Africa and the globe. I had a chance to catch up with Tim, and this was my conversation with him. I was thinking earlier about how I'm actually using this as a free consultation because I'm actually in need of what you guys provide right now. And for those who don't know, I've been a partner in the Contribution Compass program that is a sister company, Sirdar, correct, Tim?
Yes, it is. Yeah. In fact, it's back in the fold. So since we've changed the shareholding setup, Contribution Compass is now part of what we're marketing directly from Sirdar. So yeah, it's great to have them back in the team.
Fantastic. Tim, as we get started, how would you define your job and what you do?
Probably the easiest is over time, I think I've got very close to becoming a professional director because the majority of my time is spent sitting in boardrooms. But I also do quite a lot of workshops and delivery of education programs and advisory work, etc. And whatever time I've got left, which isn't very much, then I do building new partnerships and general business development work. But the majority of my focus currently is sitting in boardrooms, learning from that experience, and then bringing that knowledge back into the organization so the rest of the team can benefit.
Fantastic. If it wasn't for Carl Bates, who was the founder of Sirdar, if I'm not mistaken, and you'll clarify that, Tim. I mean, I've known Carl for many years, like over a decade now. But what I want to say is, if it wasn't for him, Ronnie Mule and a bunch of your teammates, I think Roger was already there at the time, but I wouldn't have successfully climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and wrote a book about it. Hey, but that's cool. A topic for another day. I just wanted to say I really appreciate what you guys do a lot, and I know that as I mentioned, I haven't been active much around Contribution Compass, but I'm coming back to my roots, and that's why I've just relaunched the A-Game Business Blueprint yesterday, and part of that methodology includes governance, which is why I really wanted to reach out and speak to you and have you on the podcast, and not just for myself, of course, and for the audience out there. And with that said, before we jump into the more technical questions, I know Sirdar has a position on this idea of business owner versus shareholder. I know it's something yes. that Carl kind of drummed into us over the years. So do you mind explaining that concept and the difference specifically between business owner versus shareholder?
So we got a big wake-up call when Carl wrote his last book, which was the most recent book, Traversing the Avalanche, and we asked Professor Mervyn King to write the foreword. And in the book, we had referred to business owner all over the place. Mm. And he came back and said, look, the book's great, but you can't say business owner because it isn't a legal definition. It doesn't exist as a term anywhere in any Companies Act anywhere in the world. He said you have to say shareholder manager because that's what you actually are. You're a shareholder and a manager, but you can't own a business because a business is a juristic person. So if you owned a business, it would be slavery.
Wow.
So you have to understand that a business has various people or various roles. One of them is shareholder that has a basket of rights. Another is director who's there to be selfless and do whatever's in the best interest of the business. And then you have managers that do the doing, who implement the strategy.
True.
But there is no such thing as a business owner. And using that language actually confuses your relationship with the business because you start to think that the assets of the business are yours and they're not. They're owned by the business, and you may have access to them in particular contexts, but they're not yours. So it's not your piggy bank. It's not your car. It's not your people that you can use to do your bidding. They are part of the company. So yes, it's unfortunate that we continue to use this term because it does confuse things. It confuses the relationship.
True. So true. I would love to expand on this idea, maybe in a different podcast. But you mentioned the books. I'm a big fan of books, as you can see behind me. I have both.
Good man, yeah, good man.
Yeah, of course. The Laws of Extreme Business Success. Got both when they both came out. Yeah. I really appreciate them. So to our audience, this is more for your benefit. You should definitely check out Carl's books. Talking about Carl, Tim, I remember, I think it was a year ago, where I saw that he was exiting the business, or at least as a shareholder. Are you allowed to share what's happening around there? And I know he's pursuing a political career.
Yeah, absolutely. So for as long as I've known him, he's always said he wanted to go back into politics. He's originally from New Zealand, and he was part of the political party that he's been elected with now, the Conservative Party of in New Zealand, from a very early age. I mean, from 18, 19 years old, he was quite strongly involved in the youth part of that particular party. And he always wanted to go back into politics. So when COVID happened, he was separated from his family because he was based in South Africa with his wife and his first son, and his mother and the rest of his family was all in New Zealand. His mother had been in a relationship for a long time and had said, look, I want to get married and I can't wait any longer. I can't wait for you to come back and this whole COVID thing to finish. I'm getting married. So he went over to New Zealand for his mother's wedding. And at the time, you had to stay for 90 days in New Zealand. Otherwise, his wife would have had to pay an absolute fortune for a visa. It was like 100,000 rand or something. It was ridiculous. So we sort of rejigged the business a bit and, okay, well, yes, we can make this work. And yes, we'll have meetings early in the morning, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, he went over there. But now he's in New Zealand with the rest of his family and with the people he was in the political party with. And they started, okay, so you're going to do this politics thing? When are you going to do this politics thing? You're going to do this politics thing. And his wife eventually said, look, if not now, when? And if it's not going to be now, we're going back to South Africa because I want to bring my children up in South Africa, which is closer to my family. So he made the decision, okay, I'm going to get into politics. Now, if you're going to get into politics in New Zealand, you have to remove your operational involvement in business. So he had to go through a process of trying to find someone to buy his Sirdar shares if he was going to go into politics. So that's what he did. And it took us about a year. We found someone to buy his shares. Warwick van Breda now owns the shares that Carl sold. And he went into campaigning mode and he drove around in his car with Carl Bates all over the doors and whatever. And he got elected into Parliament at the end of last year. So he's now a bona fide politician in the government of New Zealand.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But I expect nothing less from him. I mean, he's always been amazing, really.
He's put into place all of the things he taught us about sales and about building businesses. And he took all of that knowledge, applied it to the political campaign, and he got twice the votes of the incumbent, who was the favorite. Twice the votes. He went into a completely new region, which was his home state, but they weren't the party that was in power at the time.
Yeah, he was
competing against the incumbent, who was the opposition party, and he got twice the number of votes.
That's brilliant.
So yeah, he's good at what he does.
Maybe we need to get him on the podcast as well.
yeah, definitely worth trying.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So when considering scaling a business, which is something I'm in the process of doing now, especially expansion, I briefly mentioned when we were catching up just the different units that some of which have failed, but some we've reconsolidated back into a game business. And some years ago, I'd registered a holdings company, and I think it's time now to start restructuring all of that in a way that's going to make sense. What strategic planning steps should shareholders and not necessarily business owners take into account to ensure a smooth transition, similar to what I'm looking at doing, which is expansion through a group, and of course, more importantly, to officially put together a board?
So the main thing we talk a lot about is to understand the difference between a craft mindset and a craft business construct and an enterprise, because they're fundamentally different. So the craft tends to be about one or maybe two or three craft people who it's all about their skill and ability, whereas an enterprise is about a team. So are you going to play golf or tennis, or you're going to play a one-person game, or are you going to play a game that's based entirely on a
Team
team?
sport, yeah.
So if you're going to play the game of being on your own, then rather set up a sole proprietary kind of business, because it's all about you. You don't have shareholders, directors, managers. You have you. So just stop messing around, get your head straight, and just say, okay, I'm a sole proprietor, and get on with it.
Yeah.
If you're going to build the game of enterprise, if you want to have a business that's about a team, then you need to understand the difference between what does your shareholder hat look like, what does your director hat look like, and what does your manager hat look like? And try as far as possible build different teams at each level, because it forces you to take the time to think with only a shareholder hat on. What do I want from this business as a shareholder? What a return on investment, what capital growth? Have I appointed the right team to be directors? That's the shareholder conversation. Then you park the shareholder conversation and say, right, okay, this is what shareholders have said they want. This is their statement of intent. Now, how am I going, as a director, how am I going to deliver against that? And also include the conversation about every other stakeholder. What's in the best interest for this juristic person, this business? And then directors pass that strategy down to management to be delivered. So with my manager hat on, what is my contribution to delivering this outcome, delivering this strategy? So we use Contribution Compass to build the board, and we use Contribution Compass to build the teams all the way down through the organization. And particularly
Which
in a
I've seen in
board,
action, and
you
I
want
love so much.
balance.
Yeah,
You
yeah, of
you
course.
want that Contribution Compass circle. You want heads all the way around
Mm.
that circle at board level,
Yeah,
because otherwise you
yeah,
miss stuff. You go off in a particular direction and forget about what's the opposite profile would naturally see. So
wonderful,
yes, we
wonderful.
use Contribution Compass a lot, and it's just, what hat are you wearing? Understand that as early as possible, and then start building the teams actively, knowing that this is a team sport, not a solo sport.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Tim. And for the benefit of our audience, we will include a link to Contribution Compass at the bottom of our show notes for this episode. And with that said, Tim, tell me. I know a big part of what you do, of course, is educate and implement high performance boards. What are some of the critical skills, principles that you emphasize that boards need to have in order to be effective in privately held businesses, as well as family-owned business, which is something I want to talk to you about a bit later.
Yeah, I think the big thing is to understand that there are basic business principles that apply to any type of business, whether it's a charity, whether it's a for-profit, it doesn't matter what it is. And that comes down to that, and thinking like an entrepreneur, and thinking about a team and building a business as an enterprise. So what you need to think about is, how do you separate the hats? And that involves some kind of independence. So particularly the bit in the middle, the board, how do you make sure that you don't have all the same people as above or below? You have some kind of independence in the middle, which forces you to have a different conversation. So King 4, King 3, King 2, King 1, the principles that Professor Mervyn King's been talking about for a long time is that you need to have non-exec directors involved. And ideally, the majority of non-exec directors should be independent. And that's truly independent. They're not a family member. They're not a friend. They're not part of your trust. They're not an ex-consultant. They are completely independent, and preferably not part of your industry, because otherwise you just talk about operational stuff. You don't talk about building a better business. And that makes a fundamental difference. So if you've got a chairman who's completely independent, you've got at least one other person in that boardroom who's independent, it fundamentally changes the game, because now this team is only playing one game. They're playing the game of directorship. They're not clouded by and confused by all these other hats that are telling different stories. When are we, shareholder hat, when are we going to get our dividend paid? And why isn't this business growing fast enough? And I've put all these years into this thing and it's not happening. It's not happening. Or the manager had, oh, that's a ton of work. I don't want to have to do that. Oh God, I'm going to have to find people and employ people and lay people off. And they're all confusing noise that shouldn't be part of the conversation at the same level in the boardroom. So that's the boards I've been on where we've got that right. It changes the game, really does. If you've got too many shareholders, there's just too much focus on the shareholder hat. If you've got too many managers, there's too much focus on operations, and the conversation drifts to wherever the commonality is, which is not helpful. You need someone who's holding the space of strategy and really focused on strategy and implementing it.
No, it's fantastic to understand this at this level. Thanks, Tim. Tell me, I know you deal predominantly with boards, but of course with shareholders and so forth. Founder entrepreneurs tend to struggle with these kind of transitions. What has been your experience in terms of the entrepreneurs and founders that you work with to help them transition into, I guess, a board or similar type role that they now need to transition into and start thinking in the way that you explain now? How do they tend to deal with that transition?
So it's a lot to do with what their involvement is in the business. And there's you can look it up, the 5 phases of growth. Now, no business follows it in a perfect line, but it's a useful model to look at to understand what phase you're in and what is appropriate for a particular phase. So the first phase involves the creativity of the entrepreneur. How do I create a new product? How do I use something that already went before and change it up and make it different? So it's all about creativity, and it's typically that creativity is in 1, 2, or 3 people's heads. That's very much more of a mentorship kind of engagement. So get a mentor, get a coach maybe to help you as an individual start to let go and build the team below you so you can spend more time, the creativity to take the business to the next level. The phase which follows that is usually when you've got to delegate responsibility. And that's what entrepreneurs struggle with the most, because they got the business to where it is now. It's my business. It's my baby. I'm not ready to put it into nursery school yet and let someone else look after it. That's the constant battle as an entrepreneur, is letting go and stepping above the business and away from the business so that you can look down on it from above and go, okay, that's working. There's some gaps in this team that are supporting me and helping this business grow because I'm in it. I'm delivering, I'm doing, I'm all of those things. So I've got to have a space, even if it's just once a month for an hour or two. I've got to get out of the weeds. And that's where a board helps, because it forces you to get out of the weeds.
Yeah.
But it usually needs some kind of self-development, some kind of coaching, some kind of mentorship to shift the mindset to, okay, I've got to get other people in here. I've got to bring other people in who can do things better than me so that I can take the space to move up and above and use my founder energy to take the business to the next level. So you need the foundation, you need the team, you need all of those kind of things to help you. Otherwise, you don't have the space, the time, the energy to actually focus on the business. We talk a lot about, working on the business versus in the business. And then we spend all our lives working in the business and we never quite get the next bit right.
True. Thanks, Tim. One of the things that I mentioned briefly earlier is the idea of family-owned business. I don't know if this is cognitive bias at its best, but I believe I've heard or have experienced that family-owned businesses tend to have a slightly higher success rate. I don't know. Please correct me if you have insight here. But I have learned and understood that it's actually one of the at least strategies that we should consider. For example, someone myself, I've tried in the past, failed dismally, but I'm not giving up yet. So what is your perspective around this, and how do you view family-owned business as a type of business in inverted commas?
I think most businesses are family businesses because that's the way they start. Someone's got an idea and the rest of the family help them to develop it. And then you bring in your wife so typically the
Yes.
sort of, very typical characterization is the founder creates the business and their partner does the accounts or does something involved in the
True.
business. And then
True.
they
Yes.
bring a son or a daughter or a cousin in
To
to
do
help
marketing.
with delivering something. And then they
Yeah.
might bring a few other people in, and slowly it goes.
Yeah.
And around the world, most private businesses by number are family businesses. And in South Africa, a huge amount of the wealth is held in family businesses. So it's a reality. And
Yeah.
the difference is typically in terms of understanding the hats you're wearing and making sure you've got the right partners. So a lot of partnerships break down because they brought in a friend who is not necessarily the ideal person to be a partner, a business partner. And those relationships tend to be a little bit more fragile than a family relationship. In other words, you will hold on longer to a family relationship than you would to a
True.
friendship that's not
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
So again, the model is generally a little bit more resilient if it's a family business, but you get massive problems with not understanding which hats you're wearing. So you end up with a patriarch, matriarch who favors, depending on the culture, favors the firstborn son, and they may not be the best person to take over the business. So across all kinds of businesses, second, third generation is rare. First generation is pretty rare. It's 5% success rate or something crazy. Second generation is more like 3. Third generation is less than 1. Fourth generation is almost unheard of, because those family dynamics and the relationship
Yeah.
dynamics
Yeah.
cause the thing to just fall apart, because the leadership's gone, the
Yeah.
motivation's gone, people have got different things they want to do. Now there's money, so they want to spend the money, not earn the money. They want to be takers, not givers. All of their dynamics kick in.
Mm. And how does bringing in an effective board inside that kind of scenario help? Does it improve the dynamics in as far as family members are concerned, especially independent
If
board
the
members?
shareholders are willing to hand over some responsibility and trust that the board is going to do the right thing, it works. If they can't let go, it doesn't. And I've been
Yeah.
involved with several big family businesses where we just couldn't get the shareholders to let the board make decisions. They had this huge list of things that they would veto and needed to be involved in. And then now it's
Yeah.
leadership by a committee again, which just doesn't work. So if the family gets to the point where it can understand there needs to be a professional group that run the business, and then a family committee that runs the family. And if you get that right, that's when you get these families that have been in business for tens, decades, centuries, because they understand the difference between the governance of a business and the governance of a family, and they've got the right teams running each. Then it
Nice.
works. Then you see
Nice.
these families that have been around for 200, 300, 400 years. That's how they do it. So they treat bringing a family member into the business very close to any other employee that they would bring in. They must have the right training. They must have the right attitude. They must have the right aptitude.
Yeah.
Bring them in and bring them, and they work their way up. There's no expectation that they will get a particular position. You must demonstrate that you can get the particular position. But what it does do is, if they're the right person, they bring that family energy into the business. They give that family dedication to, this is a multi-generational thing. This is a legacy I'm taking forward. So their energy and their commitment is different from a normal employee, but they must be able to do the job.
Yeah.
And that's
Wonderful.
usually where
As
it
you,
falls over. You haven't
of course.
trained the next generation. You haven't appointed the right people. So the point about a board is, you've now got a professional team that's got the best interests of the business at heart, not just thinking about the family. Their focus is on making sure the business is profitable, is sustainable, etc.
Beautiful. Have you found that, and I hate using black and white kind of references to speak to us and our people here, but I moved to Soweto about 2 years ago, and what an experience it's been, especially looking at the economy, looking at how we perceive business. I'd be interested to know if there are any insights, any anecdotes around your typical white family-owned business versus how we as Black Africans tend to view the idea of family-owned business, because there's a lot that's happening that's predominantly bad that I see. But then you have families like the Maponya family who are doing amazing, right? But there's
Yeah,
too few of them. I'd be
yeah.
interested to know if there are context-based conversations happening in in African communities. But,
No, I think one of the fundamental differences I've picked up is culture gets in the way often. So we work a lot. I work a lot with Indian businesses, particularly in Kenya,
Mhm. Mm.
and it's the culture of the daughter can't work in the business, or the daughter can't inherit shares, or
Mm.
whatever it might be, and you're just not engaging or getting some really talented people to be
Sure.
involved in the business.
Yeah.
So if the person who can take the business forward happens to be the girl in the family or the daughter in the family, then they should be given the opportunity. But the culture, the family traditions, the whatever get in the way of that. The other thing is, someone said to me in Kenya a while ago, "You white guys know business." So I think there's an opportunity for each of us. We're not good at the community part. You can look at Western culture all around the world. We're not good at community. Generally, African tribes are very good at community. How do we blend those?
And
But also,
networking, but we don't utilize that network.
yeah. And so you see the Jewish community are phenomenal at it, at networking. The Indian community are really, really good at using the network. I think from Black African tribes haven't got that bit right. There's almost a resistance to it. There's almost a
Yeah.
resistance to supporting each other to be successful. So yeah, there's lots of different dynamics at play. But I think South Africa, we've got way too polarized, and we're not talking to each other and sharing each other's skills and abilities, and taking that whole forward well enough, which you can see in other countries where they don't have such strong divides. They're working together better, and they're getting a better result. So we want diversity of thinking in a company. Let's forget about what color we are. We want a diversity of thinking, a diversity of perspective, young, old, poor, rich. Let's get all of those perspectives to help each other grow. And that just not happening at the level it could. And where it does happen, you get the most spectacular results because all the pieces start to fit together, work together, and build a much, much bigger whole.
And with what you just said, Tim, I know that I'm close to you is ensuring people have dignity in the country, job creation. How is what you're doing in high performance boards contributing to that?
So it's been very strong in the South African governance for a while that we need to think about all stakeholders. So I talk a lot about, good directors grow companies, but great directors change lives. So if we are doing our job properly, we can have an influence much more broadly than just the typical mindset of shareholders do well. We can improve the communities we're in. We can improve the lives of for our employees. We can improve the lives of our suppliers. There's so many ways that a company can positively influence a country, a community.
I'm going to make sure to share those links to the website, YouTube, and of course your personal LinkedIn, if you don't mind, and the workshops, webinars, and so on. So yeah, with that said, I hope our audience also got to learn quite a bit today, and that they'll make sure to pursue some of the advice, if not all of it, that you've provided today. Thank you again, Tim, and I hope that the word will get out there, especially with Carl. I'd like to see Carl on this podcast one of these days, and I do wish him and you guys all the best. And I'm coming back into the fold soon, yeah?